NASCAR Heat Evolution is by far the worst entry in the modern Heat series, and it might actually be the worst NASCAR game to ever hit shelves. There's a lot to unpack here. No sane person is going to tell you that this is a good game, so the question becomes, how bad of a game is it? And what, if anything, is there to enjoy in this game? And that's basically what we're going to be breaking down in this review. Like I mentioned, there's a lot to unpack here, so I'm going to use a little bit of a different format for this one. We're going to separate everything good and everything bad about the title, give a little explanation, and then move on into the familiarity of breaking things down in categories. I've recycled some categories from previous series, but there are also a lot of new dimensions that are unique to not only racing games, but the Heat series as a whole. We'll cover that a little later in the video, but first, let's get into this game a little. Obviously, the bad outweighs the good by far, so it's likely going to remain more fluid to list all the negative things about this game and then polish it off with the bright spots before moving into categorical talks. One of the first bad things that you notice right off the bat in this game is how terrible it actually sounds. What most people think of when they hear this is how laughably inaccurate the cars sound, and you'd be 100% correct. They are god-awful. The cars sound like fighter jets, and if that's not bad enough, they sound completely wide open as soon as you hit about 2,000 revs. But that's not the only way that these sounds are god-awful. The voices in this game are horribly compressed. I mean, like Far Cry 3 pirate level bad. You have a choice between two crew chiefs, Bobby Labonte and Matt Tifft. Why is he in this game? Guys, why is Matt Tifft in this game? Okay, I have no clue why Matt Tifft is in this game because in 2016 he was doing fuck all, but whatever. We got Tifft. Bad news is they sound horrible. They literally sound like one of Churchill's wartime speeches. It is that bad. And the acting is even worse. It sounds like they just threw $100 at them per line and did the VA over the phone. Credit to Drive-Thru for half that joke. And in terms of the actual content of the voices, the spotter is so terribly unhelpful, it is a mystery to me why he even exists at all. He has 3 lines. Still there. Still there. He says this even when you first pull up next to someone, but then never repeats it until you're clear. 3 wide. No! No! He does not specify if you're top, middle, or bottom. Clear! Clear low. He only sometimes indicates when you're clear. That is the extent of his information. There is a program voice line that's supposed to tell you when there's a wreck, but it never works like it's supposed to. The only time that voice line will actually trigger is if there's a slow car on the track and there isn't a wreck. When there's actually a wreck, there's no information or anything regarding that. The last bit of sound atrocity in this game comes from the horribly blended cheering that abruptly takes place whenever you take the lead, or whenever you're going through the corner for the final time, or whenever you're finished qualifying. It is atrocious and sounds just like as copy-pasted as it really is. It is almost laughable that it's there, and it's just another thing that you have to try to ignore in this game. The last little footnote about the busted-ass sounds is the fact that if you turn off the menu music in your game, it will still play the music on the actual title screen until it loads your save or whatever, like it forgets what you chose and has to read your settings before it turns it off. And the god-awful 1992 compressed sound effect that plays when you progress in the playoffs. And that's all I have to say about that. Sounds 2 out of 10. Oh, God, what should we tackle next? I feel like addressing my new details about how the spoilers don't change and the packages aren't accurate is like 200% out of the realm of possibility for a game of this level. So let's shit on something else. Let's talk about how this game looks. Terrible. Oh my God, this game looks bad. It looks like something that would be pretty impressive if it was a PS2 game in 2005, but somehow, someway, this game came out in 2016 and looks awful for what other racing games looked like at the time. The catch fences and basically everything in the distance looks grainy, almost like there's no anti-aliasing. And the actual people look like that one PGA Tour game where it can render your face from a fucking PlayStation Eye. Stay in the fairway! Do it again. Stay in the fairway. Stay in the fairway! The character creation has a load of settings, but none of them will matter because they all look terrible. Okay, it's actually kind of dope, the detail that you can get into, but it still looks terrible. Overall, this game's just bad looking. I feel like I really don't have to talk too much about it. I personally don't mind because I have a high tolerance for shitty games and can squeeze fun out of most anything, but the graphics are really lackluster and extremely subpar for the time of release. 3 out of 10. In terms of the actual gameplay, you are very, very limited in what you can do. Once you actually begin your race weekend, you get a single practice session, which is laughably long, clocking in at 60 minutes, like anyone's actually going to practice for a NASCAR heat race for an entire hour. A qualifying session, which is only a single lap instead of the normal 2, It's noteworthy to add that you get the second lap on super speedways, but that's only because they want you to get the car up to speed. After your qualifying session, you move, of course, into the race, which is only configurable by a few bare bones options: difficulty, length, and flags. So, as far as for the race weekends themselves, they're pretty skin and bones, 5 out of 10. And while we're at the track, let's talk about what goes on during the race. Physics. Holy shit, these physics are wild. The Heat games in general are noteworthy for being physically laughable, but this first entry is beyond bad. I think it goes without saying that when a game has a glitch where you can spam the pause button to go faster, it has some serious issues. Hitting the brakes too hard backs you into the wall more often than not, and you have better luck rotating the center of the corner if you peck the stick to the left over and over again instead of gradually turning it while feathering the gas. It's also a staple of the NASCAR Heat games that it's almost impossible to turn anybody around, but in this one in particular, you have more luck spinning somebody out by door slamming them. How insane is that? And while we're talking about the cars, let's talk about the other ones. I really don't have a lot to say about the computer here. The AI are nothing extraordinary, and they're not too terrible either. It's nothing to drive home about, but nothing sticks out like a sore thumb either. It's truly like AI you'd see in any other NASCAR arcade game. So conclusively, Physics 3, AI 7. Since we're not too far removed from the gameplay aspect, let's talk about the interface, which actually may be the worst interface I've ever seen, and I don't say this lightly. I know I blow a lot of smoke all the time telling how X is the worst and Y is terrible, but I'm really not over exaggerating when I'm telling you that this might be the worst interface I've ever utilized. The pause menu has a total of 3 buttons. Options is not one of them. You can keep driving, drive again, or give up. Those are your 3 options. To change settings, you have to back all the way out of your career mode and back into the main menu. The actual display itself is so skin and bones, it shouldn't even exist. The overlays that are used in the game are a cumulative total of maybe 10 words, and there's not even any attempts at comprehension. This game will paralyze you, 2 out of 10. Now, one thing that the Heat games have always tried to achieve strongly, and one of the few saving graces of this game, is immersion. And while it's not without flaws, it's definitely one of the only few factors in this game. Unlike its successors, you cannot choose whether you'd like to race for someone else's team or start your own, so your career path is very, very restricted. But you are forced to start your own team, and you do have a single upgrade path that you can venture on to progressively get your team better and better. Along the way, you acquire different sponsors, and you can change the demands of those sponsors to better suit how much money you'd like to earn, how you're performing, and so on. You often get the opportunity to change manufacturers too, which is a very nice touch. However, the crippling problem with this very, very limited program is that once I unlocked all the sponsors and manufacturers, I was never approached again by any new sponsors, nor was I asked to change my manufacturer ever again. I completed all my upgrades by the end of Season 3, and my 4th and final season was dramatically boring. Another idiotic yet noteworthy thing is the fact that you can only choose between 2 numbers for your race team. Why? I have no idea. And once you do finally pick your number, there is no paint booth, and you're locked into whatever ugly car and colors your sponsor demands you to drive. And there are also 2 logos on the cars for no reason at all. So while immersion is the saving grace of this game, it still only gets a 5 out of 10 just because it does so little in comparison to the later entries. The last thing we have to talk about is fun factor, which works in a few different levels, so let's try and end in a high note. Firstly, I want to say that if this was a Winston Points era game like Thunder or O2 or something of the sorts, it would probably be unplayable for me. The win and you're in playoff format adopted in 2014 obviously is used in all the Heat games, with pretty loose AI scaling. It makes the game pretty fun to see who ends up making the playoffs and if there's any long shots. For example, one season without any interference or rigging, Clint Boyer won the Daytona Night Race and ended up making the playoffs that way. And then in season 4, Greg Biffle had a really, really good winter and spring, which kept him in points contention. Of course, towards the end of the game, I decided to go off the rails and try to get all the back markers into the championship hunt and ended up making Danica win the title. But there were some leaner forms of entertainment throughout my playthrough as well. Overall, that style of points and gaming in general just makes the game a bit more enjoyable just to see who ends up doing what, especially since there's not super strict AI ratings like in some NR 2003 car sets. It was depressing to see Truex and Harvick run as back markers every week in my 2 2020 seasons. But yeah, game is super fun to dick around in. Terrible game, not too far off from being fun though, so overall, worst game in the series, still only slightly below average, I'd say.